Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all doing? You can come closer if you really want to. So, ladies and gentlemen, foodies, healthy living enthusiasts, good afternoon and thank you for choosing to spend your weekend with us here at the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. My name is Rachel MacArthur. I'm a UAE-based healthcare journalist and delighted to be part of this panel featuring a dynamic duo of culinary experts who are right over there. So, in a world where it's not just about how much you eat, but what you eat, we've brought together two fabulously talented individuals who have mastered the art of making healthy eating a delightful and flavorful experience. And good news is there's not a single calorie count in sight. So let's jump right into it. Visiting us from the United Kingdom, and we hope the weather has been better for you here. I'm thrilled to welcome MasterChef winner and gastroenterologist, Dr. Saliha Mahmood-Ahmed, whose culinary wisdom can be found in her book, The Kitchen Prescription, right over here. And joining her is the head pastry chef of the iconic Harrods. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows Harrods, right? Philip Khoury, who's known for his innovative plant-based approach in A New Way to Bake, which is the other book that's here. So, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our guests. Hello, hello. Delighted to have you here. I'm going to steal this because I'm probably going to reference them both very soon. Right. So let's jump right into it. It's interesting actually when I first read about this panel because you two have approaches to healthy eating, however they're both very different. And we're going to find out a little bit more about that. But before we start, now, Saliha, you appeared recently on The Doctor's Kitchen with Dr. Rupi, who Dr. Rupi was actually here, I believe, a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it's about eating more of the good stuff. And I believe this inspired the title of this panel. So before we delve into your book a little bit more, what attracted you to, connecting recipes with health? I mean, I think being a medic might have something to do with it, but just what is the good stuff to you?
What is the good stuff to me? So it's an interesting question. I think that a diet, to just simplify it and make it very, very easy for people to understand, a diet that is predominantly based on a diverse range of plants, such that one has 30 plus different plants in the diet per week. And by that, I don't mean cooked up vegan bacon. I mean whole food, plant-based diet. So we're talking about whole grains, pulses, nuts and seeds, spices, fruits and vegetables. So a diet which can incorporate as many of those food items as possible during the course of a week, month, year is considered a healthy dietary pattern, in my opinion. Having explored the scientific literature quite extensively to look at long-term health outcomes for patients, in my personal conclusions of that is the best diet that one should lead in one's life. Now, I add a caveat to that. I am not a vegetarian. I'm not a vegan. But I do have an extreme plant centricity in my diet. I have meat probably once to twice a week, or fish once to twice a week. But I predominantly live on a plant-based diet.
So what actually inspired your passion for healthy eating? Because I remember you did mention a story I saw online about you being at university and eating chocolate, and then the conversation kind of started, so to speak, from there. But it's been a long journey so far. But what really inspires you?
I mean, I'm genetically modified and created as a food lover because that's just who I am. That's the generations of families that I came from. It was the unheard stories of the South Asian women in my family that have been passed down in my very roots. So my love affair with food probably began in utero. But I think when I was at medical school, I think there was this amazing duality that I found. But I just never realised that people didn't cook as much as we did at home. I mean, I knew people had different food cultures and things, but I just thought everybody cooks at home. And I got to university at 17 years old, and I thought, oh my God, nobody here knows how to cook a dinner for themselves. It was quite a shocking moment. There was another very important moment for me where I had a friend who suffered with a disorder which actually led her to put on a lot of weight because of steroid use. And I was once eating a chocolate bar walking into the lecture theatre, and we had a nutrition lecturer who was this very, very skinny little lady. And she drew in the beginning of the lecture, she said, there was a girl walking in here who was very slim eating a chocolate bar, and she sat next to another girl who is very overweight. And the thing is, you need to think to yourself, there's only a reason why that girl can eat chocolate and the other one can't. And it was horrific. It was a horrifying moment for me. On a personal level, I felt so bad for my friend. And actually, I think we had to talk about it afterwards. And I understood in that very short period of time that some of the understandings that even healthcare professionals have about healthy eating, some of the societal stigmas that the health profession holds surrounding overweight and obesity need to be broken down, and actually looking at food in a very positive way for the healthcare profession is really, really vital. So there was a few formative experiences that I had. That was one of them, which really shaped who I am today as a doctor and as a foodie.
And that's really important to kind of, because especially back then as well, if you take it back a few years as well, it is a case of, if you look at someone, you just decide, this person goes to the gym, this does it, this person doesn't, and whatnot. So it's really interesting, and I feel you do the way you explain nutrition and how it's broken down in your book as well is very, very informative. But we'll go back into the book. But Philip, now let's talk about your culinary background and your book. And you're plant-based, but are you vegan? Are you not? What?
I say that I'm almost vegan. I think I love all things sweet, and I still develop a lot of things that aren't vegan. But I would say my special area of interest is vegan baking. And that's because I think that we just need more options. I think for centuries, eggs and dairy have evolved in our diets for good reason. But at some point, we took it maybe a bit too far. And there's a huge gap in terms of the knowledge needed to prepare other baked goods that are just egg and dairy free. And I guess my approach is that, I would say about 6 years ago, if you asked me about vegan desserts, I would have just laughed. And actually I did, because someone asked me, what do you think of vegan baking? And I thought, and I was like, what do you mean? It's impossible, because as a classically trained pastry chef, every recipe, every sub-recipe contains eggs and dairy.
It's almost blasphemy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, no dairy, what's going on? So you're at Harrods, you're the head pastry chef at Harrods, and you brought all these new kind of creations to them. And I believe, 25 restaurants you mentioned?
Yeah, so we have 25 restaurants in the building, but 60% of what we produce is just for the food hall. So when we think of all the fresh food in Harrods, all that fresh food is made in-house by a huge team of pastry chefs, bakers, and then we have our savory counterparts doing all the amazing deli counter, and even our concessions are based in the building. So yeah, we have, for me, when I came in, there were just no options. There was no such thing as a vegan patisserie or vegan afternoon tea. And I just thought, we have a responsibility to serve something delicious to all of our guests. And I felt that's where I started and developed a passion for this.
So I'm curious to know, because in case, I try one of your recipes in the book, when you tested them on people, could they tell? Very honestly, could they tell they were plant-based or no?
We go through a very rigorous food product development process in Harrods. It's got like 5 stages, multiple tasting sessions, and whenever I introduce items, because I develop everything, I never like to say, this is a vegan thing that I'm developing. I just say, here is this beautiful tropical entremet with a coconut mousse and a passion fruit crema and all this stuff. I don't want to talk about it being vegan, because that's not the main thing that I just want to make a beautiful cake. And when I introduce things, I don't like to say that they are vegan. I will have them tasted, because I think there's also a lot of prejudice, because typically vegan options have always been substandard, so I don't want to tarnish the experience. And then later on I'll slip in, by the way, this was a vegan dessert. And yeah, early on, I think people these days are expecting it, but early on, people were like, "What? You know, like how can this be vegan?"
100%. So you both are you both promote healthy living and healthy eating. So I'm just curious to know, in your opinion, what are some common challenges people face when trying to adopt that healthy eating lifestyle? So Dr. Saliha, you're a gastroenterologist, and obviously, me included, I do have sometimes gut health problems, and I know sometimes my diet does affect my gut health. So I think I know what you're going to say with regards to practical tips, but what has been your advice? What do you usually promote?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is achieving perfection is near enough impossible. Okay, so we're often very, very hard on ourselves. And, you know, the whole concept of restriction is not, dietary restriction is not a principle that I live by. So I will say to people, rather than you thinking about dieting and cutting out things, cutting calories, cutting things, cut, you know, I'll just eat this much. Think about what you can include in the diet, which is where more of the good stuff comes in, you know. How can you optimize diversity? When you have that shift, it might sound small, but that shift from cutting out restriction completely and actually adding diversity. So you're working upwards to get more points. You're not working downwards like you would in a Weight Watchers to restrict the number of points you get. You're working upwards, and the higher up you go, the better. That psychologically does something for people, which is really beneficial. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think also we have to be really mindful of people's budgets. I've done some work with the Food Foundation in the United Kingdom, and we have, you may well have seen it here as well, it's sort of internationally recognised, we have something called the Eat Well Guide, which is like a little diagram that contains what the best evidence for what a good diet looks like, right? So it's a pictorial representation of what an average good diet should look like. And they've done some studies in the UK which shows that if you were to eat on the Eat Well Guide, you'd spend, some families would end up spending more than 40% of their income on just food. It's just not how it works. You know, people have got rent to pay, cars, they've got children, etc. So I think whenever we give dietary advice, there is this ideal that we're all aspiring to, you know, this many fruits, this many vegetables, how to achieve diversity. Well, I'm sorry, but we can't blow a hole in our budgets. I mean, I've got 2 children, I live in London. I can't blow a hole in my budget. But there is ways that we have to teach people, like reliance on things like grains and lentils and tinned items and the frozen section of supermarkets, and how we can be creative cooks and incorporate those dishes in our everyday life. So I think being mindful of budget is really important. And the third and final thing is being mindful of people's taste buds. Because if, for example, I have a patient who's eaten South Asian food their whole life, and then I say to them, oh, ditch your pattern of eating, you need to cook in a really different way, and actually you need to go and draw inspiration from ottolenghi, right? I love ottolenghi, but a South Asian person cannot eat ottolenghi every day because it's not what they've eaten every day of their life so far, as delicious as it is. Or if you transpose someone who's got a Mexican background onto a South Asian cuisine, you know, it's just not going to work. So we have to be mindful of creating recipe plans for people which are tailored to their specific taste buds and their specific monetary needs as well.
100%. First round of applause of the day.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks guys. So, Philip, now you're Lebanese American, not American, sorry, Australian. You're Lebanese Australian. Convincing us fellow Arabs to go plant-based is, I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, in Beirut, you guys do some great akawi, manaish, and all of this. So, what challenges do you have when you're encouraging people to go plant-based, and maybe kind of us Arabs over here, as opposed to maybe Australia or the UK, where they're a bit more...
Yeah, I think taking plant-based, like not being so explicit about it being plant-based and just being good for what it is. I think this whole thing of like being plant-based for plant-based sake or vegan for vegan's sake, we're creating like Frankenstein food. I think just go and make an amazing chocolate chip cookie, or go and make an amazing chocolate cake. doesn't have to be like, people won't enjoy it because it's vegan. Maybe a small percentage of the population might, but at the end of the day, the recipe has to be amazing. I would say just try it. I use a lot of olive oil in my baking. It's easier as well. I think people probably think that it's that they need special ingredients or that they need special equipment, but really, my approach focuses on the most basic elemental ingredients that are globally available, that are low cost, and just finding new ways to use them.
Also, it's a complete misnomer that our cultures, Middle Eastern, South Asian cultures, don't have a vegetable backgrounds, because actually, there is so much, isn't there? And the ancient recipes were heavily reliant on vegetables and much less reliant on meat than we actually now think. And actually, I think the reliance on meat is very much a 21st century phenomenon.
I think it's like a sign of our prosperity. When I think back to what my great-great-great-parents were eating, I would think that it was predominantly plant-based and meat-based foods were celebratory foods enjoyed in a time of prosperity. And I think we have this environment of prosperity of, having anything, anytime, anywhere. We're eating meat 3 times a day. But yeah, our Middle Eastern Arab food has so much vegan option. I think in a way it's been classified as like peasant food, but really it's a core part of our food and food identity.
Yeah, 100%. But it is so easy to kind of, as you said, it's that sign as well, and like generosity as well. So when you invite somebody around, you have to have all the meat dishes available and whatnot. So Dr. Saliha, in your book, I know you don't mention calorie counts and whatnot. I'm assuming with dessert, we don't need to go into calorie counts, but am I right in assuming that you're both not a fan of calorie counts? And do you look at macros or not really?
A good question. So for me, I think as a scientist, the concept of a calorie is highly outdated. What 1 calorie means to one person is not going to be the same as it means to another person, and we know that. Now, if you take a step back and look very crudely at it, so if someone's counting calories in a very crude way, so they're just sort of doing rough estimates, today I went 1,000 calories over what I normally do. Okay, as a rough moderator, that's it's not a fine tool, but it's a rough tool which can be helpful for some people who are just trying to look at overall patterns and trends. What I don't agree with is nitpicky calorie counting, because I don't think that it achieves anything, and it boils down to the same psychology that people have when they're doing restrictive eating. All the meta-analyses that have done so far on thousands and thousands of patients have shown that the restrictive eating doesn't work. When you diet, restrict calorie intake, you lose weight initially, 100%. At 5 years, 90% have gained all that weight back, if not more in some cases, which to me is the definition of a failed intervention, if people can't keep weight off in the long term. So I don't believe in calorie counting. I look at macronutrients when I'm developing recipes, because I think it's important to look at macros overall, and micros as well for that matter, overall. I don't necessarily dissect each individual thing I'm eating, because again, I'm very pro having a holistic approach rather than breaking down every little thing and getting obsessional and controlled, exerting control over every small thing that you eat. I do count fiber. And I think that's the missing nutrient that we all forget, is fiber. The UK recommendations, and actually national recommendations, international recommendations, about 30 grams a day. In the UK at the moment, we're hitting about 8 grams a day on average in the population. It's really low. And in my clinic patients, I sometimes have 4 to 5 grams fiber intake per day, and then they come to me constipated, saying, I've got no idea why I'm constipated. The dietary fiber is a missing nutrient. Everybody's always thought of fiber as being a sort of inert substance. It's not. Fiber is very active, and it exerts a very positive and beneficial effect on our gut. And I think it's a forgotten nutrient which we should be focusing on.
So curious to know then, as for my own information as well, what do you recommend as good sources of fiber? I mean, I think we have a general idea, but what are you really promoting at the moment? What's good for us?
So I mean, there's some fiber hacks, if that's what you mean, because I mean, all plant-based food tends to have good fiber content, generally speaking. So whole grains, etc., in the diet are great fiber, lentils, pulses, all the things I talked about earlier, nuts, seeds, etc. But the hacks that I tell my patients are if you are constipated, for example, then a couple of prunes a day, 2 kiwi fruits, and some chia seeds, and switching white to brown bread. And if you do that religiously, that can bring you up from about 7-8 grams fiber intake a day up to about 25 a day with just those steps alone. So it's worthwhile knowing which foods contain what types of fiber and in what amounts. So oats are a different type of fiber, much more soluble than other foods which contain insoluble fibers, and actually getting a mix of soluble and insoluble fibers is the most beneficial. I see patients who take loads and loads of insoluble fiber, loads of roughage, and then they come to you and they say, I'm still really constipated, but I eat salad all the time. Okay, that's because they've got loads of fiber, but it's only of one variety, and you actually have to mix up the different types of fibers to be able to get really good quality fiber in the diet. So I think the key things ingredients-wise that I would say, which I think are great fiber hacks, are switching white for brown bread, having a tablespoons of chia seeds with at least 100 mils of extra liquid, preferably for breakfast. It tends to work very well. Kiwi fruit and prunes. I think those are fantastic little hacks.
Sorry, very quickly, what is the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber?
Yeah, good question. It's all about the structural composition of the fiber. Soluble fibers tend to dissolve and become gel-like structures inside the bowel, whereas insoluble fibers, you sort of think the outside husk of sweet corn, it stays whole inside you, yeah? Or tomato skin, for example. So those fibers will sort of stay more in their whole state as they travel through the gut. Bacteria will ferment them and find some benefit from them, but they tend to maintain their whole structure a bit better compared to soluble fibers, which become gel-like in the bowel.
Okay.
The moral of the story is eat more veg.
The moral of the story is yes, eat more veg.
Yeah, so Philip, you're going to start eating more veg, yeah, not just continuously baking all the time. But I actually wanted to ask you as well about macros, because look, just me personally, this is not based on any science or anything like that. Just whenever I look at plant-based, so for example, a plant-based cake versus a normal cake, just in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, the plant-based one has more macros, as in it's higher in fat, it's higher in sugar, because something's got to compensate for the lack of, I don't know, eggs, for example. There might be less protein in a plant-based cake. What are your views on that?
So in my experience and in my formulations, it really varies by recipe type. So for example, in my sponge recipes, they're generally significantly lower in fat. And that's just because by their nature, if we think of the classic pound cake, a pound cake is made from a pound of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour. And when you mix eggs and flour, you need a pound of butter to tenderize the gelling effect that happens when you cook flour and eggs. So when you take out those eggs and replace them with water, for example, the eggs are like 90% water, and you take out the gelling function, you are allowing the flour to do more of what it can do, but as a result, you have to reduce the fat. So in a lot of sponge recipes, there's reductions of up to 70% fat, which is kind of unintended. It's just, yeah, I just want to let the flour shine a bit more functionally. And but then in other recipes, I would say like cookies, it's generally the same fat, same sugar. At the end of the day, it's still dessert, it's still a treat. I would still eat it in moderation. I wouldn't say it's healthier. Maybe it's better than classic recipes in some ways. There's definitely no cholesterol, but yeah, it's still dessert.
Yeah, and that's, I suppose that's the good way of looking at it, is that whilst macros might remain the same or might be a little bit high, you are eliminating cholesterol, for example, and those who can't have that or need to reduce it, that's good for that. In terms of sugar alternatives, are you a fan, not a fan, like erythritol, stevia? Okay,
I think
good.
in the future, there may be a place for a blend of a bit of this, a bit of that to reduce calories, but you can't just swap one thing for another. I think you would agree. We had a
100%
brief
not a
chat
fan
about
of
this.
sweetener in
Yeah.
any way, shape, or form.
I think,
Not good for gut health, is it?
Nope.
I'm not a fan. I think, yeah, maybe in the future there's a place for some sort of blend of them to reduce, but not as a one-for-one, like-for-like swap. I think sugar still has a functional purpose in bakes. It has a tenderizing or shortening effect. And taste-wise, I mean, there are some commercial sugar replacements available that have that work, that contain things like inulin and other fibers, mixed with some sweeteners, but I still wouldn't. I think in my recipes, because I have to start from a place of complete reformulation, I do tend to reduce sugar slightly, but I couldn't eliminate it.
I think it's about a balance with sweetness. So, for example, if I had someone who's a diabetic patient who has 5 cups of tea and each cup of tea in the day has 2 cups of sugar in it, and they say that their non-negotiable is cutting the sugar from the tea, and then in that case, offering a sweetener will reduce their sugar consumption by a massive, massive amount. On balance, could I, as a healthcare professional, justify not suggesting that they use a sweetener in that situation? Probably not. But then I would also have to explain that actually long-term sweeteners can upregulate sugar transport from the gut. So when you have normal other sugars, you'll take them up faster. You'll ferment them in the gut in a very different way. You may well become bloated, and it probably contributes to dysbiosis in the gut and impacts the microbiome, which will have other health effects. So you leave the decision in the person's court, in the patient's court. But I think health-wise, you can say absolutely not, they're not good for you, but actually every situation is black and white, isn't it?
It's about choosing your lesser evil, I suppose, because yes.
It's interesting you say that, because if I felt like a soft drink, I would still go for a diet soft drink. I know soft drinks aren't healthy, but I still think that, yeah.
You'd rather consume your sugar with your bakes.
Yeah. But I'm not drinking tons of soft drink either.
So just looking at food trends overall, I mean, you're quite in the know in your day-to-day jobs, and I'm just wondering, what emerging food trends related to health and wellness have you been seeing recently? Is there anything you've seen particularly interesting or exciting that you can apply to your recipes or your work in general? What have you been seeing? There's a lot of TikTok advice, not a lot of it is good, but I mean,
Yeah.
what's if anything?
Do you want to go first? I'll go first.
For me, I would say, like, especially related to the plant-based space, I think we're going to kind of see I hope we will see a shift away from some of the ultra-processed substitutes that have been coming out. I think big food conglomerates have seen the plant-based movement as a kind of a vehicle for pushing more processed food at us. Yeah, it is a business opportunity. It's cheaper to produce, but I don't think it's better. And I think the consumer is seeing that, and I hope they just shift back to just eating more veg. I think that's the priority here. We don't want perfection to be the enemy of progress. It's about having more balance and more plant-based options.
I mean, I think for me, a really worrying trend is the obsessional control with blood glucose that people have these days, which is something that I've been observing quite critically from afar, and actually have seen particularly some of my younger female patients, especially, who are healthy non-diabetics, regulating their blood sugar control and saying that, oh, I can only eat X grams of this carbohydrate before my sugar goes up to 6.5. And, you know, you're flummoxed because you have so much to say, yet you feel so shocked that you can't say anything because, you know, it is normal to have some blood sugar spikes, okay? The overall pattern of a diet to prevent diabetes is very well demarcated and explained to people. It is not normal for healthy young adults to be measuring their blood sugar concentrations.
So they're pricking their fingers and whatnot, and
Yeah.
doing it every day.
Yeah,
Is
and
this a
Wearing
TikTok effect?
Continuous blood glucose monitors.
monitoring devices, so you can buy them very readily off the internet. So, and in pharmacies, etc., you connect it onto your arm, and it's like a little patch. It doesn't cause any discomfort whatsoever, and it's connected to an app on your phone. And on your app, you can monitor your blood sugars, and you can see the rise in the blood sugar once you've had a cookie. You can see what an apple does. You can see what a bit of rice does. You can map it for yourself, okay? But there is nothing to say in the literature that you should have blood sugars tightly controlled all the time. It is normal to have some spikes when you eat food. Obviously, if you are pre-diabetic and you're developing insulin resistance, those will be much more marked, and there's things that you have to do to make changes to your diet to prevent going into a diabetic state, etc. Those are very specific circumstances. I think there's a lot of marketing these days around products designed by people to try and reduce blood sugar spikes down. This is not a normal trend, and I think we have to take a step back. As a parent now, I always think about impact that things will have on my children as they grow up and what they will think about and their relationship with food and eating. You know, any trend which involves meticulous and precise control over what you are eating, I think puts you at risk of detriment. So obsessional control with blood sugars is something that as a healthcare professional I'm very wary of at the moment, and I'm seeing a growing trend of people who are very wary of blood sugar spikes without really understanding the evidence base behind it.
I've done it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I wore it. No, you know, I'm a pastry chef, so I was actually concerned that I could be pre-diabetic, but it turns out I have really good sugar control.
Hurrah.
But was that because you consulted with a medical professional? If you don't mind me asking, obviously.
No, for me
or
it
did you
was,
just watch something on social media and go, ooh, maybe?
It was part of the Zoe study, but it was to get an idea of how different foods affect my biology, I guess. I did not take anything practical from it, to be honest. I think it was just to get kind of a bit of an insight. And I think when you were talking about calorie counting, I wouldn't say that I'm a calorie counter, but every now and then I'll kind of check in and just kind of see for a week, am I eating at healthy levels or not? But
Like
yeah,
a
they're
rough
tools,
tool.
but they're not something that you want to live by.
Yeah.
They are definitely tools, and you know, it's funny that you mentioned about your kids, because looking at, for example, the beauty industry, you're hearing of 10-year-olds going to Sephora to get skincare, anti-aging skincare at the age of 10, and it's like, well, what is social media doing to us? Philip, I'll ask you actually, have you seen any bad health trends? So, for example, one is the glucose monitoring, the needless glucose monitoring. Have you seen any bad trends where you're like, no, don't do this? Maybe really bad substitutes or something.
I mean, part of the reason I wrote my book was because I see a huge over-reliance on manufactured ingredients going into our foods. I think, at least for baking, the methodology for so long has been about substituting butter, substituting eggs, using kind of manufactured products in those foods. And I think really, if we were to take a step back and just, you know, this is the product that I want to make, and then find ways to reformulate a recipe using the basic ingredients that I have, that you'd have a lot of success. I think this reliance on margarines, on you know, highly refined seed oils, these replacer ingredients, these substitutes that's why I wrote the book, really, because I think we need more just elemental ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, the book, it's quite apparent that you're very pro clean eating. Actually, both of you are very pro clean eating. What are your views on sustainability then in food? Because I know that's something you're quite passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason that I pursued a more plant-based diet is because I think as a food professional, the closer you get to food and seeing how it's prepared, the more you want to lower your impact. And I think we overconsume food anyway. And this was just about finding more options.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think the impact of the food that goes on your plate is, rarely do we think about the impact that it's having on the planet. But eating a predominantly plant-based diet and cutting down the amount of animal protein that you eat is a very sustainable form of eating, sustainable for our planet, which is in dire need of help and care. And with our growing world population, I think we have a responsibility to eat in a way that preserves the environment around us for our future generations as well. So there is method in the madness of prescribing plants to everybody. I'd say one other, you mentioned sort of worrying trends. I think also the whole trend for pill-based supplementation in healthy individuals.
Oh no, I do that a lot.
I mean, I think one of the things I would say is rarely do those supplements do any harm necessarily.
Good.
Because of the fact that most of them contain such low levels of the active substance. But they do have potential in extreme situations to do harm, number one. Secondly, I'm a really firm believer that a balanced diet should be achieving the majority of, you should be able to achieve the majority of the intake that you need. The caveats for that are women with vitamin D and men with vitamin D deficiency and pregnant women who should take folic acid supplementation. But there are some specific circumstances where I think supplementation is helpful, but overall, from a general population point of view, walking into Holland and Barrett and taking every supplement under the sun and thinking it's going to do your health some benefit, like magnesium and oil of evening primrose and X, Y, and Z, la-di-da-di-da, it's not going to do anything apart from break a hole in your bank, you know. So just be wary of supplementation, and actually a good diet should be able to give you everything that you need without the need for supplementation.
Not even inulin?
Not even in it. You can get that from coffee. Yeah, you can make a nice coffee from inulin. And also inulin causes a lot of bloating for a lot of people.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true. Right. So I do want to throw it out to the audience because I'm sure you guys have questions as well. Do we have questions? Just so. Okay, so I can't see right now, but I'll throw it out shortly. But now I know you guys obviously don't know each other well, but you've met here and you've hung out briefly, and you know what each other is about in terms of what they promote and what their books are. So I wanted to know if you could add, tweak, or change anything about the other one's approach to healthy eating. What would it be? So we've got the plant-based guru, and then we've got the gut health master. So what would you change? Is there something, for example, I don't know, maybe, I was thinking sugar alternatives, but then again, you guys don't like them. So is there anything? There might not be, but what would be your feedback to each other as experts?
I think we were very well paired. When I found out that we were together, I thought it was quite nice. There's a nice crossover in terms of approach and philosophy, and I got to hang out with Saliha yesterday on a food tour, and I think we actually talked quite a bit about sugar, about lots of different things, diet, and I think
I wouldn't change anything about Phil. He's perfect as he is. But what I would say is, look, there is a role for sugar in our life. Okay, I work towards people having a healthy lifestyle. I even hate calling it healthy, just a holistic lifestyle where food plays a really prominent part. But we're evolutionarily designed to love sugar. Phil knows that, I know that. You know, we love sugar, and it's for good reason as well. You know, the way it impacts our brain's reward pathways and makes it feel, the way that we use sugar in celebration is incredible. So a life without sugar means very little to me. But what I always say, which I've also said in my book, is to analyze your own very unique relationship with sugar. Now, Phil's a pastry chef, but he has a very healthy relationship with sugar. And I've met people who have very healthy relationships, but also very unhealthy relationships with sugar. In times of emotional need, in times of desperation, in times of fatigue, they turn to sugar as a crutch to rely on, to give them more energy, to more emotional sustenance, to give them that dopamine rush that they need to keep going. And it's when you get that intersection between sugar and your life where it starts becoming destructive. which is where I think we all need to take a step back and reanalyze where we are. And the relationship with sugar evolves over time. I know for a fact that if I'm very tired, and this happens quite often, I wake up in the morning and I just want anything sweet. You know, even if it's a date or like, you know, I'm just looking for something sweet because I can't get up, I can't function without it. I need sugar, and I can. If you give me a pack of biscuits, I will be able to eat it in the morning. So when I'm tired, I can eat it. But if I'm tired, with a cup of tea. So, you know, but I'm aware of that, and I'm aware of the physiological mechanisms which underpin that, so I can work to try and get through that in a healthy, positive way. So I have a mildly sweetened breakfast with some fiber to try and moderate the sugar response that I'm going to get, right? Without checking my responses, because I don't need to, because I'm not diabetic and healthy, as you know. So yeah, I think the individual sugar response is really important. And if it was one message I would ask people to take home, is to really think about your relationship with sugar and have it as a source of enjoyment and happiness in your life, rather than it being the overbearing food that you consume.
But sometimes, you know, life's worst problems can be solved with a jar of chocolate spread, you know, at times. So yeah.
I don't deny that.
Actually, talking, you know, with Ramadan coming up in March, obviously a lot of people break fast with dates. Are there any other good sugar sources? So maybe Ramadan's an opportunity for some of us to rethink the way we do sugar, so to speak. So what are good sources of sugar, do you think?
I'll let you
for
go.
breaking fast,
So
or whether you're doing a sports
jaggery.
fast.
I love jaggery, so unrefined cane sugar. And it's part of our South Asian culture. We have like big lumps of jaggery, and they're just unrefined blobs of cane sugar. And what's really beautiful is basically grating a little bit of that over some live yogurt, maybe with some oats and nuts and seeds inside it, as well as a really delicately sweetened, malty kind of tasting instant dessert, which I love. And it has so much more there's so many more polyphenols and fibers in that sugar in comparison to refined sugar, which is, you know, pure and white. So that's a great little alternative. I love dates in Ramadan, and I'll be honest, I've been writing some recipes for the BBC for Ramadan, and I've written a recipe for pastry with loads of Nutella and sugar and cream inside it. So listen, Ramadan is Ramadan. If you don't eat something sweet in Ramadan, you're not normal.
Yeah, I mean, sugar, for me, sugar is sugar. I think the good thing about dates is that they're high in fiber.
Yeah.
But I love the flavor of unrefined sugars. I think when we talk about things like jaggery, like muscovado, they're very similar. This is sugar, the syrup has been just boiled and boiled and boiled until it crystallizes, and they don't rinse it. Like purified sugar is basically just, they just keep rinsing it until it comes out white. And so you're losing flavor. But I think the difference between when we look at raw sugar, if everyone knows like raw sugar crystals, or I think the difference is like 0.5%. The raw sugar and white sugar are almost identical nutritionally. They have a little bit of flavor, but they're almost the same. I think, yeah, there's no substitute for sugar.
Awesome, that's music to my ears. So do we have any questions? Ooh, lovely stuff. All right, so where is our mic? We have a volunteer, yes. So to the gentleman in the keffiyeh, what's your question?
Can you hear me? It's actually quite refreshing to hear the redefining of what's normal, because I think, you know, I can see myself getting obsessed with calories and how to, you know, manage the weight. One thing which I just wanted to ask about is the organic versus non-organic conversation, because you know what we hear is that there's a lot of chemicals in the vegetables, even for the vegan vegetarian food. How do we create that balance? Because it's quite expensive if we go to organic. So I just want to hear your opinions on that.
Thank you for your question. Organic versus not organic.
I mean, that's a really tricky one because organic food is quite expensive. I think if you can, absolutely. Like I have a chapter in my book called The Pastry, where I go through all of the basic ingredients that are naturally plant-based that we have. And I talk about, use organic where you can, but I think that's really difficult. I think, Yeah, organic when you can, absolutely. But I know that's not a reality for everyone.
I mean, the other thing is obviously growing, you know, yourself. I'm very happy to say that I got a house with a small garden for the first time. I mean, this is a big achievement in London, you know. Yeah. And we bought the house 2.5 years ago, and I've suddenly found myself incredibly green-fingered. So I've got herbs, I've got beautiful fennel plants, you know, it's a work in progress, but there's a whole veg patch that's evolving for me. I did some cauliflower, etc., and it just came out really beautifully. Green beans, etc. So one way of guaranteeing organic produce is actually being able to grow it yourself. And if you lack space, then in actual fact, you can even grow on a window ledge when we're talking about herbs, etc. So where you can, small changes are additive and do make a difference. So if you can do those small things. One thing that I think that's really important that we haven't talked about, which not that many people do talk about these days, is growing and the impact that it has on our soil. And soil health is really, really important as well. So we grow and we leach the nutrients out of the soil, which go into our food, and we consume the food. But do we allow our land to restore its natural microbes, to allow the nitrogen to go back in, to allow the vitamins, minerals, etc. to go in? And actually some of our farming practices are not particularly conducive to fomenting good soil health. And all we do is then go and put extra fertilizer and chemicals, etc. onto our soil. So if you're really interested in it, there's a really good association in the UK called the Soil Association. And they talk a lot about not just organic produce, but actually how we can go about guaranteeing the future of our soil. Because actually, if our soil stops working for us, then we become unable to grow properly.
Yeah, I think to tie into this and the question of future trends, the idea of regenerative and organic farming is huge. I think that's going to be the next frontier. When we talk about growing wheat, I think you can grow one crop of wheat every 6 years. It's an incredibly intensive crop, takes a lot out of the soil. And these days, so many crops are just grown from seed stocks that the roots grow, and they're optimized to be tap-fed fertilizer. The soil is dead. There are no worms. There's nothing alive in it, but it's growing something. And there's an organization called, they're a company called Wild Farmed, and they've done this thing where they've developed a method of, it's not certified organic, but it's regenerative farming where they grow 4 crops at the same time, something that covers the ground, a bean crop that fixes nitrogen, wheat, and I think flour, something that flowers. And these 4 crops work together to ensure there's no fertilizer being used at all. There's no fungicides, no pesticides, no herbicides. And they crop the wheat a bit higher. They've modified the tractor to just trim it a bit higher. They get a bean crop as well. And it's really interesting to see all these different methods of farming that are needed, because the reality is that in so many developed countries where we've been intensively farming, there's only 60 to 100 years left of that soil being able to grow things.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. There's a debate going on in our house between us and our 12-year-old son about protein. He keeps complaining that we're not feeding him enough protein. He does a lot of sports. Apparently, all his friends are eating steak for dinner every night. I'm a big fan of plant protein, and Saliha, as you were saying, trying to just incorporate a lot of different types of food in the diet. The idea of eating a steak a day just horrifies me. So I've been researching and trying to introduce more plant protein, but is there a difference between animal protein and plant protein, especially for a young child, almost teenager, who's doing a lot of sport and, for muscle health and growth and development? Yeah.
Great question. Is he quite fussy, or is it just the
He's
protein aspect?
He's not a fussy eater, but I think he thinks he will gain a lot of muscle by eating a lot of steak.
Okay, so we talk about the essential amino acids that are contained within proteins, and there's 20 different amino acids. In plant-based proteins, there are very, very few plant proteins that are complete proteins. By that, I mean that they contain all 20 amino acids. Animal proteins, so that's eggs, milk, fish, lamb, all chicken, poultry, everything, steak, is a complete protein. So it has all of those 20 amino acids within it. Now, this is where it becomes a bit of a debate, because yes, you can have all of those 20 amino acids by eating a piece of steak. But actually, if you have lots of different plants in your diet, you will also get those 20 amino acids. You just won't get them in one go, if that makes sense. So, the other thing that people say to me is, oh, I'm on a vegan diet, my son is on a vegan diet, is he going to be able to get enough protein to grow? Well, it's about the quality of the vegan diet, and whether that child has enough other protein sources within the vegan diet to be able to get everything. So I'll give you a classic example. So one of the only complete proteins that's plant-based is quinoa. Okay, so quinoa has a couple of grams of protein per 100 grams. But a meat protein has, if you look at the equivalent quantity, would have far more protein in it. So yes, it's a complete protein, but there's very little complete protein in quinoa in comparison to a piece of steak. It's a very individual decision that you make. I think if you can get different plant-based sources of protein across his diet, that would probably be my preference to having meat every single night. But a child at 12 years old who's very sporty in his growth phase, if there's no ethical concerns surrounding vegetarianism or veganism, which I presume there isn't, I think you could give him some red meat every week and probably stick to having quite good plant-based protein sources like legumes and beans and pulses, paneer, cheese, things like that, and tofu, etc., so that he still gets the protein he needs. Now, if you want to measure the amount of protein that he's getting, there's a huge variation in the amount of protein that's recommended according to dietary regulations.
I was going to ask you,
So
are we over-fixated with
a little
getting
bit,
protein?
I think, and especially recently, there's this huge trend on eating more protein, which has come and filtered down into social media as well. And there's loads of drives to get older people who are losing muscle mass to eat protein as well. And there's lots of evidence about how protein satiates for a bit longer as well. So it helps people feel less hungry because it's broken down a little bit more slowly. And I do buy into some of those things. But the variation across the guidelines is incredible. So you'll have one guideline which will say 0.85 grams per kilogram versus another that says 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight. Okay, that's almost half, so where do you fall in that? And again, I'm not the person who says you must do 1 gram per kilogram and measure it really accurately. But if you, as a mother, you are genuinely really concerned, I'd say the average of the recommendations would be 1 to 1.2 for a young growing boy. So you could do a rough count once every so often just to see if he's getting the right amount. But beyond that, I think the better thing to do really is stick to the basic principles, get loads of different plant proteins from a variety of different sources, and add in meat as and when you can, maybe once or twice a week at least.
Great. I want to fit in 2 quick questions before we run out of time. This gentleman here, hello.
Thank you. It's a question addressed to both of you. What's your take on gluten? Even if someone isn't intolerant to it, is it something we should be wary of and look to reduce or eliminate altogether from our diets?
I absolutely think gluten is important, but I do think that we are in some ways eating a lot more of it. In the same way that we're now eating, 3 servings of meat a day, I think we are probably over-consuming gluten. It's an essential function in baked goods. So from a practical perspective, the gripe that I guess I have with some gluten-free breads, for example, is that they then become completely full of carbohydrates, nowhere near enough the protein. Because, when you have a slice of bread, I think it's something like, you'll get from a 200-gram manouche, for example, there's about 15 to 17 grams of protein that you wouldn't get from a gluten-free manouche. And then, but we are over-consuming but I don't think we should eliminate it.
So this is my special interest, celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. So in my practice, I deal with a lot of patients. So there's a difference between true gluten, like an autoimmune disease called celiac disease, where the body simply cannot tolerate gluten and you shouldn't have it because it has detrimental health consequences, versus gluten intolerance, which is a self-perception that you have symptoms when you eat gluten. And they are two distinct phenomena. Okay, we call that non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and we have to deal with it in a very different way. Now, if you're not having, genuinely gluten every single time you have it and you've done a really good food diary and you've identified that it's causing you symptoms, I think it probably is right to not have something in your diet which is constantly causing you symptoms. And although I'm not pro dietary restriction, and I think those people don't have to be too strict about it because they don't have any antibody mediated reactions happening in their body, I think it's okay for them to restrict some gluten and find alternatives that suit them a bit better. Having said that, gluten-free eating is also this huge trend, which was started by the likes of Kylie Jenner, etc., on social media. And a lot of young girls started restricting gluten on the basis of the advice that they were giving on social media, which is ludicrous. It's gluten-free eating is not a trend. People who take gluten out of their diet are ill if they have gluten in a really serious way. They need to avoid cross-contamination. They should not even be cooking in the same pots and pans that people who have than other people. So you shouldn't even have cross-contamination in your cooking equipment. It's really serious.
I think it's like the difference between something that's gluten-free and not gluten-free is 5 parts per million. So like if you drink oat milk, for example, a lot of oats are naturally gluten-free, but there can be cross-contamination in the fields. So unless you get like a certified gluten-free oat milk, so it's a very, very, very fine amount.
Yeah, and that very, very fine amount makes a huge physiological difference for people who are truly affected by celiac disease. So the first thing to do if you suspect that you have gluten intolerance is get a proper test done. And the proper test involves blood testing, and it involves an endoscopy where someone like me will put a camera down and go into your duodenum and take some biopsy samples, and they get looked at in the labs. And you must be on a gluten-based diet when you have that done. If you're off it, then the changes reverse anyway, so you won't see anything. So if you suspect that you have gluten intolerance, the first thing to do is go and see your family physician.
Right, well, Saliha Mahmood-Ahmed and Philip Khoury, it has been a delight to have you. Just very, very quickly before we go, what has been the most nuts thing that has happened to you in your career so far? What has been the most insane thing that happened in your career so far? Is it MasterChef? Is it what's been just in one line? What's been your biggest highlight so far? Could be here, could be just coming to Dubai for the Lit Fest,
Meeting you.
You're very kind. I think last year I got an award from my absolute idol. I know I've written a book, but at the end of the day I'm a pastry chef, and this was, Pierre is the person. He's such a awe-inspiring figure. He's like the pastry god. So to get an award from him and then have him follow me on Instagram was pretty cool.
Way.
That's an accolade and a half right there. Yeah. Saliha?
I think there'll be probably 2 key moments.
Okay.
First one, the day after I won MasterChef, I was working at Watford General Hospital, and there was a patient who'd had a huge gastrointestinal hemorrhage, and I was dealing with them and resuscitating and sorting them out. And they said, "Are you not the girl who won MasterChef last night?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." So that was a good moment. And he's very well, and he lived, and it was all good. So that was fantastic. And then I suppose the second big moment for me is that my books to date have won some nice awards and things, but it was when The Kitchen Prescription became a Sunday Times bestseller.
Nice.
On the week that it came out, which was amazing. And I think writing is a very lonely art. It's a very lonely thing to do. And it's funny because you're writing for people, but you're very much doing it on your own. and you become your own worst critic. You doubt yourself. Are my recipes any good? Will people like it? Will people like the title? What do people think of the inside? Are the pages nice? Like, is this aesthetic enough? Is this what I wanted? And you question every single aspect of what you've created. So to get that validation back was an incredible experience for me.
But to be very honest, that's when you know you do something right. Because I feel when you're constantly thinking about ways to improve or doubting yourself, not that doubt is great, but I think that's what creates success anyways, that constant strive to do better. So thank you both very much. Guys, I'm not exaggerating, but honestly, A New Way to Bake and The Kitchen Prescription, so they're both out on sale. I have read them and they're phenomenal. I love how The Kitchen Prescription has actually a whole medical section and talks about, nutrients and micronutrients and the microbiome. And there's so much information on there. So it's not just recipes, it's the science behind it as well. And same, Phil, I love how I was telling you this earlier, I love how with the bread, for example, you have different weights. So whether you're cooking for 2 or you're baking for 4 and stuff, it really breaks it down. I really like your history in that. So honestly, these 2 titles, highly recommended. Speaking of which, there's going to be a signing right after this session. So if you'd like to come to the lobby, that's where the signing sessions take place. And this brings us to the end. Time went by really, really quickly. So just before we go, I would like to thank you guys, the audience. Thank you once again for joining us this weekend and spending time with us. I'd like to thank the AV team, volunteers and translators, our title sponsor, Emirates Airline, our founding partner, Dubai Culture, our parent organization, Emirates Literature Foundation, and our session sponsors, which are Dubai Calendar and Dubai Duty Free. Thank you so much for sponsoring. And of course, last but not least, I'd like to thank Saliha Mahmood-Ahmed and Philip Khoury. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. That's a really long round of applause, by the way. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.